Hey folks, I'm Raf, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a whole bunch of new stuff that we've been building at Defang. Our goal, as always, is to make it as easy as possible for you to deploy, but we've been really focused on making it dead simple to go from developing your application to deploying it into an AWS account with an experience that feels as simple and straightforward as using any of the simpler managed platforms that are popular with a lot of startups and builders these days. So you can get that same great developer experience with the power of the AWS cloud. We're going to be using Kiro because we recently released a Kiro Power, but the Power includes the Defang MCP server, which is actually usable with a lot of other IDEs and coding agents. So you should be able to do pretty much the same thing in those environments as well. Today I've got a pretty cool project that I'm going to show you, which is available in our samples. It's a really cool app that we got from Mastra that lets you select a GitHub repository and chat with it. So you can ask questions about contributors, commits, and all kinds of other stuff. It's really neat. It's built with Mastra, Next.js, Postgres, and AWS Bedrock. Let's take a look at it. To deploy with Defang, you need a compose file. So let's take a look at that first. You can see we've got two services. One is a Postgres database, and the other is our actual application. There are some environment variables, like the database URL, database SSL, LLM model, and the same kind of stuff over here in the database. You can see we've got the xdefang Postgres true extension set for the database and the xdefang LLM extension set for the app. The database extension makes sure that Defang provisions a managed database for you. So you'll get an RDS instance that you can communicate with in the same way that you would in your Docker Compose environment. The xdefang LLM extension makes sure that your application is able to communicate with AWS Bedrock. You won't need to mess around with IAM or permissions or anything like that. Defang will take care of it, and you'll have full access to all of the large language models available in Bedrock. All right, let's get started with the Kiro Power. To do that, you'll head over to this little icon with the Thunderbolt and click Add Custom Power. Then you'll click Import Power from GitHub and paste a link to our power. I'm going to put that in the video description, but for now, I'll just paste it from here. You should see this error pop up if you don't have Defang installed already, but you'll notice that if you click Try Power, one of the first things that Kiro will do is ask you if you want to install Defang after first checking if it's installed. So you can see it gives us 3 install methods. I'm going to go ahead and use this one. So I'll do Defang login. I'm logging in with GitHub specifically, which is important for the rest of this video, because I'm going to show you how you can configure GitHub to automatically deploy new versions of your app as you push them to your Git repo. Now that we've logged in, let's go check out the Defang portal. You can go to portal.defang.io, and you'll be redirected to this auth screen. I mentioned it was important that we use GitHub, so let's click this GitHub button again. And you'll see that my GitHub username is listed here. I'm going to head down to Clouds, at which point I'll see this Cloud Connection interface. What Defang is going to help us do here is create a connection between GitHub and our AWS account, such that our cloud account trusts GitHub to deploy. So let's click Start AWS Setup. You'll see that my GitHub username is already listed here, and you can choose to deploy only private repos or all repos. It's good to keep in mind that you can also authorize GitHub organizations. So you can connect a work organization in GitHub to your AWS account using Defang. Next, let's click on AWS details, and I'm going to go fetch my AWS account ID and return to the portal and paste it here. You should select the region that you're going to be deploying to. In my case, that is US West 2, and then click Connect. You can just scroll down to the bottom, click this checkbox, and click Create Stack. It should just take a few seconds and you'll see this Create Complete message below the stack. Feel free to close that window and let's head back to Kiro. I'm starting a new session because I found that sometimes Kiro works a bit more smoothly if I do that after installing. If it starts the session with the assumption that the CLI is not installed, it can get a little bit confused. I'll click Try Power and let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and accept this command. I don't really want to estimate our deployment cost. Let's just say deploy to AWS. So Kiro is trying to run a tool called list stacks. As we go through this process, I'm just going to auto approve all tool calling from Kiro. So it'll have free reign to call those tools as often as it wants to after I've approved them. Now stacks are an awesome new feature from Defang. Stacks allow you to deploy and keep track of individual instances of your application. In some cases, that might map out to environments, like you might have a dev environment, a staging environment, or a production one. In other cases, it might be deploying your application to different customer cloud accounts. One way or another, it's a really useful tool to keep track of your application deployments. So I'm going to click Auto Approve and Accept. Now Kiro wants to know which profiles are available, and you can see it's trying to use the AWS CLI. I'd recommend having that installed and having already authenticated against your AWS account. We recommend using profiles to manage authentication against different accounts, which is what Kiro is trying to figure out here. Cool, so I'm going to tell it to make a stack called dev. For region, I'll put US West 2. The AWS profile I want to use is this CD demos one. And I want to use the affordable deployment mode. Deployment modes are another really cool feature of Defang. At the moment, we offer 3 different modes: affordable, balanced, and high availability. They kind of do what they say on the tin. So affordable is the lowest cost option to deploy your application. High availability really is trying to limit downtime. So we'll set up rolling deployments, failovers in your database, all kinds of other stuff that makes sure that your application does not go down. And the balanced mode is somewhere in between the two. Great, I'll hit enter and let's see what happens. So Kiro wants to create a stack. All right, now it wants to select the stack. So I'm going to auto approve that and accept. And finally, it is going to call the deploy tool. Now there is something that it's going to run into here that I know is going to be a problem. So we'll see what happens. There it is. As we talked about earlier, our application requires a few configuration values for SSL, for the LLM model, for the Postgres password. Kiro is asking if I want it to manage that config. And our Defang MCP server does allow it to do that. All of those configuration values will be pushed up to our cloud account, encrypted, and injected into our services according to best practices. You can see there's a set config tool, which also gives Kiro the option to generate a random value. We'll also allow it to set the configuration value for SSL and the LLM model. You'll note that we have some suggested configurations here in the comments, and that's what it's pulling from. Great, now it's calling the deploy tool. It takes a few minutes for AWS to provision all of our resources. In your AWS account, you can navigate to the Elastic Container Service page. And in here, you should see this Defang CD cluster running. That's where Defang is building your application and provisioning your infrastructure. If you click on tasks over here, you should see this task pending. Eventually it'll run, and then eventually it'll stop. At that point, we'll know all of our stuff is good to go. All right, so this thing has stopped, which means our deployment should be good to go. So I think it's ready. What's the URL? So you can see it's running the services tool, which will give it some information about the services in our application. It says still provisioning, but it should be good. Awesome. So we can click here. And when was the last commit? Cool, there we go. And if we refresh, we can see that our conversation is still here. Which means that we're properly connected to our database, we have our web service up and running, and we're able to communicate with AWS Bedrock. If we look in the dashboard, we'll go back to our Elastic Container Service clusters, and here we can see our v3 demo dev cluster. So that's where our application is actually up and running. And if we go to RDS, we can see that we have a database instance up and running here. There's no visual indication of Bedrock working in the AWS dashboard, but the fact that we're seeing streaming text coming back means that it is able to connect with Bedrock, which would not be possible without that Defang LLM flag or doing a bunch of manual work in AWS to configure those roles and permissions. Okay, so this is all working really nicely, and I'm happy to see this deployed. But normally, if I'm building an application, I want to be able to push to a Git repo and have it automatically deploy. So how do we do that with Defang? Earlier, we configured that trust relationship between GitHub and our AWS account using the Defang Portal. So what we're going to do now is push to a GitHub repo and watch that deployment run from GitHub to AWS. So I've configured a Git repository, and I am going to show you how that deployment is going to run. I've got these two workflows in here, deploy dev and deploy production. All of our Defang samples come with a basic deploy.yaml workflow, which will help you get started setting up your deployments. I want to be able to push to main and have a production-ready, high-availability deployment. So I've got this deploy production, and it will run on push to main. And we've said here, provider AWS stack production. That's under our Defang GitHub action. And that configuration will allow the Defang CLI to deploy to our AWS account from GitHub Actions. You can see here, though, I've got a production stack. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask Kiro, hey, I want to make a production stack. Same as the dev stack, but high availability mode. Okay, it called the stack prod, so I'm actually going to have to update this and call it prod. Let's just double check the values. So this looks the same. High availability. Okay, I think we're good to go. We'll do git add all, git commit deploy. So I'll run git push. And let's just set that origin. So if I head back to the repo, there it is, and I can click on this pending deployment. And we'll see here that it is starting to deploy. Back in AWS, let's go to our home page, click on ECS, and we'll see that we have a new CI/CD task about to run. So we'll check in on that in a little while. But we should see it all deploy through here in GitHub Actions. All right, So we can see that our build and deploy task has completed, and I see a nice little green check mark over in GitHub Actions. So at the very bottom here, we should have a nice URL we can click, and you can see our stack name is there. So Defang Labs Defang. Let's ask a different question this time. List all contributors. Alrighty, so there are all of the contributors to the repo. So we have a functioning production deployment triggered from GitHub Actions. You could go in and make an edit to the code right in here, straight in GitHub, and it would redeploy to your AWS account. That simple. Finally, once you've run those kinds of deployments, you might want to get some sense of what's going on. So we can head over to our projects tab, and in here you'll see our two stacks. You can see all deployments, and we are working on a resource browser. So you'll be able to click and see if a deployment went well, if it failed, and you'll be able to click through and see all of the different resources that were provisioned in your AWS account, which should help with debugging. If something goes wrong, you can see what failed and why. But for now, at least you've got this list of deployments and your different stacks. So that is all of our fun new stuff at Defang. We've got stacks that allow you to better manage your different environments or deployments to client accounts. We've got our zero configuration AWS deployments. So you just click through our portal to authenticate your GitHub repo against AWS, and you can start deploying. We've got new integrations with Kiro as well as other IDEs, deployment history, and stacks in our portal with new features coming soon, as well as a bunch of other stuff that we're really excited for you all to try. So check it out, give it a shot, let us know. We love to get feedback. Drop it in the comments or shoot us an email, come to the website and leave an issue in GitHub, whatever you want. We love to hear from you, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.